What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod, and it's time for patch 25.21. Let's talk about it. It is the post-Worlds patch, but, well, we're all still really busy here on the design side, and we're not doing, right now, a lot of stuff for the live game. It's all going to be coming out at the beginning of the new year. We're mostly working towards season start. Pretty much all our design resources that would be normally doing small-scope live gameplay stuff or working towards season one instead. I think this will be really good from a gameplay perspective. The things we're trying to accomplish, I think, will be really positive for the experience of gameplay, but it does mean that, yes, the patches have been fairly unexciting for the last several months. I know, but that's where we've been sending resources, and to be fair, right, doing better stuff around player behavior and having a better season start, I think, will be better for the game in the long term. So, like, I do think these are, like, the right choices to make. I would kick and scream if I thought they were bad, but no, I think we're going to be doing some good stuff here. So stay tuned. January, I think, is going to be pretty sick. Regardless, though, I want to talk about what's in this patch itself. We did plan on buffing Skarner. The general thought process we have around this is, so we don't want to knee-jerk players back and forth over and over and over again, right? We don't want to give buffs just to, like, take them back away a month later or 2 weeks later or whatever. That feels pretty bad. Now, of course, some of that has to be rectified with the fact that we clearly do worlds balance that we're not going to keep up all, year long. But it's like, well, if it's a champion that would normally be nerfed for all year because it's, 8 months ago Callisto or something like that, that's a different story. But regardless, we don't want to do changes that we think we're just going to have to revert in 2 months' time. Now, we don't think it's going to be the case. The stuff we're going to look for with Skarner should be, I think, positive. It's going to be some give, some take, but win rate positive. One thing I do want to note with Skarner, by the way, is now data is a little bit more precious on this champion because there just aren't that many Skarner players, but we can gather enough to have pretty reliable reads. Skarner is fairly hard. He's a really unique champion. Accounting for mastery and comparing him with other champions, he's only about 1% underpowered. Now, that said, we typically let hard champions sit, mathematically OP for a while until people learn them. Unfortunately, Skarner got put in a spot where he was one of the 3 best tanks in the game, and so pros learned him, unsurprisingly, way faster than everyone else did. And so pros got up the mastery curve. And if you go and look at, like, Skarner's pick rate data in solo queue versus pro play, it's like Skarner was solo queue, like, bounced around for solo queue balance for a while, for several months, and then eventually settled down in solo queue and then kept rising in pro priority and suddenly became the best pro jungler in the game because pros eventually finished learning the champion and eventually rode all the way up that mastery curve. And the way that Skarner is tuned right now, he's roughly as solo queue balanced as, say, Sejuani or any of the other, pretty much any of the other pro play champions right now are all in a relatively similar tuning state, but the generic winner to Skarner looks a lot worse because he's way harder than all those other champions and also newer. Again, that said, we would still totally love to give Skarner a respectable solo queue win rate. And again, I still mean mastery adjusted here, where he's going to be like 48 or 47, but like that will be a balanced Skarner where he's as good as other junglers, just he's hard. Again, I think there's stuff we can do here, but the stuff we want to do is a bit riskier, and so we're going to delay it a patch. We'll basically start the work on it in, I guess, by the time you're watching this, within 6 hours. Yeah, fingers crossed that we can have some good stuff for Skarner that should allow him to stay at a much stronger spot for solo queue. Let's finally move on. We have a cool systemic patch here where we're doing some adjustments on laning incentives. I know there's going to be some second order fallout from that, but we think it's still correct for the game overall, and we'll talk about that down the line. Otherwise, we have just a slew of basically solo queue focused balance. Let's go. So first are a set of systems changes. The first suite is to all the Doran's items, so Doran's Blade being shifted back from Lifesteal into Omnivamp. My memory of why these changes happened to both Doran's Blade and Doran's Ring, where Blade became Lifesteal and Ring just became flat mana regen, was the designer, and this could be me misremembering, the designer's no longer working on League, and this is, a year old or so as a memory, intended to make the items a bit simpler and easier to understand and use. I think this was ultimately incorrect. I wasn't good enough at the time to realize, like, this would have been a mistake. We shouldn't do this. You can partially blame me. Even if I didn't do the physical implementation myself, I was a live designer. I was in, I could have looked at this stuff and been like, we shouldn't do this. Here's why. I didn't. My bad. So Doran's Blade going into Omnivamp is largely because there's a lot of champions it has to serve. and they aren't all auto attackers. Now, even if they use AD, it's like, well, a lot of the damage out of, say, like a Riven is her Q damage, and it's still going to be doing reduced damage in AoE, but she only autos for some of it, but it still has to be an item that properly suits Riven. So again, AoE damage is still roughly 1/3 effective. Lifesteal, of course, pretty much going to port right directly over, but this is basically a shape of Doran's Blade that, yeah, it's got a unique passive. It's a bit more complex, but more properly serves as a starting item for the wide range of AD champions that exist. This might actually allow Zed to not start Longsword, though I know he wants to get his first lethality on the board, but things like that where it's like, of course Zed never gets auto attack, but now he gets some Omnivamp for it. We'll see. Again, it's not like it's a Zed buff. It's like, hey, there's champions like Zed who like clearly can't use lifesteal. This item should serve them. Doran's Ring is going back to creating the incentives for offensive action. This is getting paired alongside a Doran Shield nerf and a second wind nerf. Essentially, the state the game is in right now is before last chapter, it's generally not worth trying to use spells on enemy champions, that the incentives around minion gold and champion durability and mana pools and regeneration are all such that it's not worth interacting. That is a bad state, right? We do want interaction, especially aggressive, active interaction, to be the optimal way to play the game where, hey, if you're the strong laner, we should balance you around that fact. And you should have to play the strong lane, and you should be trying to bully your opponent and farm plates and take better recalls and be first the objectives, whatever. And that shouldn't just be, well, my wave clears better. I've got more mana and the better AoE, and so because I killed the minions faster, I'm the better champion. That's a really boring way to be the stronger champion because, well, it's really boring. You're pressing spells on the wave. So we want to make sure that active interaction with enemy champions is rewarded. Now, this is a relatively strong swing relative to the older Doran's Ring. This is 5 mana over 5 seconds. The old one, if I recall correctly, was 5 mana over 10 seconds. So if you're really, really active here, this is going to be more rewarding than old Doran's Ring. Doran's Shield, only the melee version of the regen is getting affected here, and the amount of regen you get is based on how low you are. So it is up to 5 less health when you take damage from a champion. If you're down below that, I think it's like at 30% current health, roughly around there to make that happen. So it will eventually be up to -5 health when you take damage, but at the start, it's not going to be that. Doran's Ring, again, 5 mana on hit, up to if you re-hit before the duration's over, you're going to get less back. But again, we want to make sure those interaction incentives are there. And the second one is a pretty light touch, but it's -4 health on hit. So you still have the current health stuff. Actually, it's -3, sorry, I think. Regardless, the current health, missing health heal is still there, but it just says, hey, look, if you're running Doran Shield second win and you're running Doran's Ring, Doran's Ring and maybe Presence of Mind, maybe not, rings are funky like that. You are going to have your opponent get up to 9 less health back. You're going to get 5 mana back yourself. And so the incentives toward interacting with your opponent should hopefully go toward interacting. Now, of course, we know it's going to do a lot of things for melee range dynamics. The general way I think about this is that ranged champions should try to bully the melee champion out of the lane. And the melee champion, I think ideally, depends on the matchup. KO's not going to do this, obviously. Should try to find their own way to bully the ranged opponent back, and it's find those all-in windows. And there are some champions where this is very clearly real. And look, I'm not saying at level 1 you can fight an Orianna, especially if you like E-starts. You're not doing that. You're not winning that trade, and that's going to be the case. And really good player, yeah, that means they get to like run the first 3 waves instead of the lane state. But there's going to be a point in time, maybe first recall, maybe some other point in time where you can fight back. And I think about like, what does Sylas do in mid lane? Sylas can fight you back, right? It is very clearly possible to tune a melee champion such that they can fight back and really threaten you and make you play around their threatening windows and be like, you can't all in this wave. I'm holding E1. If you walk up any farther, I'm E1Wing you, and you have to basically coin flip dodge my stun or you're chunked to half. And if you get wronged again, you're literally dead. And I think that like roughly 1-2 punch pacing makes sense. I think not every champion can be easily given that amount of damage, but I think that level of tension is about right. Roughly speaking, Sylas's approach to laning phase is, I think, again, about right for range versus melee. And if it means we have to give, 10 more base damage to a lot of melee champion spells or give enough mana that they can fight back, well, we'll do that. That's fine. But that's vaguely the direction we would like to go. And yeah, step 1 is we're nerfing these tools so that the ranged champions want to interact with the melee ones and not just push lane forever. And if they don't push lane, by the way, they're losing out on mana and whatnot, right? If they don't hit you, they're just going to lose out on mana and have worse wave push, right? And then from there, if we need to retune melee champions who are doing too poorly, we are happy to retune champions. There's a lot of things where it's like, here's a systemic change. The expected fallout is some champions are weaker. we then buff those champions. It's very easy for us to measure win rate patch per patch. It's very easy by the time we do their next reactive balance meeting to have 5 days of data and know pretty reliably what the real impact and win rate was. If it's like, oh, every melee champion lost 1% win rate. Okay, we would give every melee champion 1% win rate back. And it's maybe not in the case of Silas, but for almost everyone else, we give you all in power so that you can go fight back and make that lane have tension again, right? Other final change here is we're nerfing Catalyst's health by 50. Now, I do think Catalyst's regen from mana spend is actually very precious, and I think we shouldn't touch that. This is the kind of thing that melee champions do actually need, is the way to recoup that that health when their opponents have lost chapter and have ways of getting a lot of mana. But I think the flat HP, less needed for melee champion, where all-ins are not really that threatening, but it does matter a lot more for, say, Orianna or whatever. I do kind of wish we had thought of this change earlier. That's my bad. We definitely could have used this as one of our nerf levers over the course of time. Regardless, I think the buffs we did to Catalyst's mana were appropriate. I think the buffs to the build path, personally, I think were also appropriate. I don't like this build path is bad and could easily be made better. I don't like that as a balancing lever. Now, I do think if we were in a world where it's like, hey, like, I think, to be clear, like, BF swords existing is a good thing. It's like, here's an item with 70 AD, and we're not going to make it 6 longsword. That's stupid. But it's like, here's an item with 60 AD. It's got a BF sword. Very reasonable. Here's an item with 300 health, and it's not 2 ruby crystals, I think is, unless you're building out of, like, a haunting guise, is kind of trolling. So to me, it's like, trivially made better build paths are not something we should withhold. Maybe there's reason to do that, but I would generally not be in favor of them. But again, there's almost certainly exceptions, but as a basic rule of thumb, but not, authoritatively, kind of how I feel. So I would not want to do this and like take the ruby crystal off. I think it was a good change. But yeah, the various needs on Catalyst, I think the regen's important, I think the mana is important, but the health less needed here for any melee champion going Roa. And of course, when you finish Roa, there's no nerf anymore. You still get 350 on the Roa itself. On the champion adjustments, we have several big ones here, actually. First one is a revert to 25.05 Gwen. It's funny. So the state Gwen was at in 25.05, compared to literally today, that Gwen was more powerful in terms of mastery measured win rate, especially in jungle, but in top lane as well. She also had no pro presence at all, and so it turns out that, like, early game E reset was like the one mechanic she got, and that was like enough to completely flip the script and be like, you're amazing in lane and you're in pro all the time now, and we have to balance you around pro, which means that Gwen is, like, right now mathematically undertuned. Now, not by a lot, by about 1% win rate, but mathematically undertuned right now. It's like, okay, well, the end result here is tuning Gwen around our entire balance strategy, which includes solo queue balance, but also includes pro presence, resulted in a Gwen that, measuring now to 5 months ago, is a less popular champion. Essentially, the same number of people are willing to play Gwen, but those Gwen players play less. Basically, it's equal on breadth, way lower on depth. Now, when Gwen was, like, very overpowered for, like, most of the last 4 months or whatever, she was really broad as well, because she was the best top player in the game. Of course, she was, like, literally the best top player in the game. And so, slowly brought that down to earth, and now, again, being balanced somewhat around pro, actually underpowered, and unsurprisingly an underpowered champion, not as deeply played, who would have thought, with the same breadth now that she's not just free low, right? Not, tracking any new players. So anyway, the whole thing didn't quite work out well. I think there's some we could do to, like personally, my target for basically every champion of the game is get them toward 20% pro presence. Some will never get played, and some will sit at 3%. But it's like, hey, if we can bring the ones at 90 down to 20, that brings the one at 10 up to 20. That's not going to mathematically, reach the entire roster, but it's a goal that I think is always very reasonable. It's like, if every champ is like the number 8th most played champ in the role, that's a really good spot for that champion in pro play. And if a lot of things are tied for 8th place, that's pretty sweet. That means you get a really, really wide variety of things you can play. It also means that there's wide strategy possibilities. It means that there's not a very obvious strong tier list, and that means teams can be like, we play Kiana jungle, we're cool like that. And I think that's really sweet. And so I think, somewhere we I actually believe personally, though maybe we won't do this, I think it's actually likely we won't do this, but I actually believe personally, like, we could re-add some of the E changes we did in 25.6, and like have her have some pro presence and give her a little bit more early agency, and like that would be sufficient. But for now, it's like, look, the end result was it hurt Gwen players. Let's go back, right? So reverting Gwen to 25.05, she was mathematically quite OP in jungle and a little bit OP in top lane on that patch, and so I personally did the numbers tweaks to revert back to the old numbers here. I left in, this is not 3, this is 0.3 armor growth, which is very little. It's like, 5 armor at level 17. So 0.3 armor growth and jungle mod nerfs that we had added over the course of time since that update in 0.6. Those two changes have remained in. So it's like a fraction of a percent of win rate of power off Gwen, probably like 0.3% in top lane. And then of course the jungle mod is going to mean a lot more, but Gwen was like meaningfully OP in the jungle back then. So the sum result here of these reversions should be, based on looking at the old data, this should be plus 1% win rate right now to Gwen top lane, plus 1% win rate right now to Gwen jungle. If we get off by a little bit, we can always massage some things, add some power back, take some power away. But the goal is, again, a relatively balanced Gwen that sustains a player base. Next thing up is a big set of changes onto Yunara. So Yunara now officially belongs to Live Design. So the last set of changes were done by our champion designer. We left her in the state that she is in for Worlds, as I'm literally watching Worlds right now on my third monitor. Game 2, we're looking at, actually, never mind, whatever, talk about it later. As we saw from the first game, though, Yunara got played. And as we saw from, like, LEC postseason, they were playing Yunara even after, like, the live World nerfs. And we're like, okay, we have to wait. We have data to believe that Yunara is in this state right now, where she's kind of a pro champ. So what we're doing here are a set of adjustments. But the goal here is win rate positive. If we get it wrong, we will just add more nerfs. If we get it really wrong, we'll micropatch. If we get it wrong by a little bit, we'll just buff again in 0.22. So there's a lot of changes here. So number one, right now on live, Emax second is about 1% higher win rate than Wmax second. For a while, the changes on PBE, we're going to bring them to roughly equal. What's probably going to be true about Yunara and the patch going live in about a week is Wmax will probably be better to the tune of 0.5 to 1% win rate. Now, that to me is still in the spot of being roughly situational, where there are going to be situations where Emax second will be correct, even if generic win rate doesn't like bear that out. There's going to be cases for that. But we are heavily increasing the rank up incentive on W. One thing that is true about Yunara's W and E is the cooldowns are intended to and will remain flat, because it is intended that they share their cooldown with the ulti versions of those spells as a very minor learning point, and there's a little bit of playing against power. It's not a very big deal, but it's largely around Yunara has to replace 2 of her spells, and so having a somewhat similar feeling cadence and honestly a somewhat similar feeling cast paradigm helps that be like very easy to transition over to. And it's just like, I think it's just a good idea to like share those cooldowns. I think it's smart. And because RE fully replaces E and RW fully replaces W, none of those spells care what your rank up on W is. And if it did, they'd be like, oh, I need to rank up W so that my RW has a shorter cooldown, which like I know you could do and is not the like biggest sin in the world, but there's enough kind of weirdness there that we're trying pretty hard for now to like, no, E is a flat cooldown, W is a flat cooldown, which means there's of course fewer levers for the rank up. But I think that's totally manageable, and we can like design a champion and tune a champion well with flat cooldowns on 2 ability. That's not a huge deal, I think. So anyway, let's go into the changes themselves. And this math here, by the way, is the hit on W and 1 full second of DPS on W. To me, that's like relatively sane. You basically, from what I could tell, and I tried a fair bit locally, you cannot take a tick of W's dot without taking a like chunk from the hit on W, and the dot on W ticks pretty much instantly. Where it's like if you take a hit of W, you're definitely taking a dot tick of W. And so to me, I'm just like, look, we're gonna put these together as one number because you're realistically gonna take about 1 full second of this no matter what. And like, yeah, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less, whatever. And for what it's worth, actually, the dot on W is getting a bit more damage than the hit of W here. So if people are bad at getting away from your W, or you're really good at coordinating with your team, W is a little bit stronger relative to the numbers here on paper. And if your opponents are really good at like, oh, you hit me, but I got away really fast and didn't take a full second, it'll be nerfed relative to that, right? So my belief is that worse players, right, lower MMR players are going to be worse at getting out of the W, and that the dot is a low elo skewed bit here. And while Yunara is in a state where she's a moderately difficult AD carry, roughly top half, but not top 10% by any means, and a lot of Yunara players are still bad at Yunara. Yunara is mathematically, I would say, about 2% underpowered. That's before accounting for things like how high her agency is. She actually might be, you know, OP after that in that measurement, but there's a lot of players dragging at Yunara's win rate, you know, sitting around at like, you know, these players, and it's like 2/3 of Yunara's players are at like 44% win at the champion, and then like the other 3 to know what they're doing are like already close to 50, you know, 49 to 51 in a lot of those cases. So anyway, to get the point, what we're doing here is bumping up W rank up quite a lot, and we're converting her W and her RW from total AD to bonus AD. I'm a big fan of bonus AD on champions who are not meant to go to solo lanes and scale with level. I'm also a big fan of it from a live design perspective, because it makes it much easier to tune base stats and like not to think about like, oh, but what does it do to W breakpoints and wave clear and power spikes? Like, no, you can just like have a number and it's fine, it works. I'm just I find abilities are much easier to tune if you're not a Juggernaut when you do bonus AD ratios. And it's sort of easier. It's saner. You can have like much more control over rank ups and whatnot. Just a lot gets easier for people with jobs like mine if you use bonus AD in a lot of cases. So I do that whenever I can. I think it's just kind of better for maintenance. And it just, again, like, it's easier to like compare apples to apples, be like, oh, this spell does this damage, this spell does that damage, and I can like look at them and not be like, wait, so what's her base stat and her attack damage growth? Okay, so like I just think for a lot of people it's easier to read. Finally, on to the changes. I know it took a long time with preamble here. We're back. We're back to old preamble videos. The old Phreak is back. This is a very substantial. So it's a minor increase in early game. It is a very large increase in late game. The total like scaling from gold goes from 125% AD to 136% AD. The functional base damage ability, if you max it second, is always going to be higher. If you max it third, it's a sea of red and green. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. Basically, Emax Yunara is not gaining a lot of win rate, maybe a little bit of win rate, but again, some red, some green here. By the change, W max second Yunara is clearly gaining win rate here. It is just, green the whole way through, and so it is a stronger ability, and we expect QW Yunara to overtake QE Yunara. E move speed is getting moved around. The move speed buff no longer decays. It was a linear decay down, losing a fraction of its move speed every tick. So this is, in some ways, the E move speed has functionally doubled. That's not quite true because diminishing returns is a real thing, especially running toward enemies. So you would end up, not actually getting 50% more move speed because you'd run into a soft cap there. But it is still, in a way, think of it as approaching double the total move speed on the ability, which of course is a really big deal. It's one of 3 of her basic spells, and it's almost twice as powerful. This should be a big deal. Now, it's not twice as powerful as a reactive dodge for skill shots or whatever. We do think this is also going to be somewhat low MMR skewed, and I should also say, not necessarily low MMR skewed, sorry, but in this case, low mastery, low familiarity with Yunara. So that it's just a more forgiving ability with a less sharp timing test, and it will still, like even chasing opponents, cover more ground, let her do more aggressive things, or run farther away, but just overall easier to kite on this champion. There's a bug fix. It actually never set itself back to I'm facing away. Basically, when you pressed E, it would put I'm facing away. And if at any point you were facing an enemy, it would be like I'm facing an enemy. Then it would never have a condition for setting it back to I'm facing away. So if you ever looked at an opponent at all, you always got the 1.5x move speed. That would of course decay, but you'd always have the 1.5x. So that's bug fixed. It now, when you look away, it goes, oh yeah, I'm not looking at anybody anymore. Go back to the old version. That of course is a nerf. That is an actual amount of power away. But again, if you were just Eing backwards, it would never turn on. You had to like E at some point, look at them, and then turn around, and it was decaying. So it's like, you weren't getting that much power out of that, but it was a bug. I fixed it. Okay, great. There's also a nerf in increasing the cooldown by 1.5 seconds. Basically, W is a meaningful amount of power. Because it will probably overtake W second over E second. E no longer decays is a meaningful amount of power as well. And we actually think this might be an overbuff. And so, yes, we want E to be satisfying. Yes, we want it to be powerful. If it is not strong enough, we can give some more power to E next patch. That's no big deal. We can bump the move speed by 5% or whatever. Maybe some duration, who knows. But we can cross that bridge if she's weak when we come to it. I've been increasing the cooldown because honestly, the spell has a lot of uptime. And it is actually one of the abilities that is very strongly pro versus solo queue skewed. One of the reports we have is ability presses. It's like a bunch of stats, gold, CS, kills, deaths, but also ability presses. Yunara E is one of the most strongly pro skewed abilities relative to solo queue players. Even like high MMR or high mastery solo queue players, like pro players just press E way more in Yunara. And so a world where you can't press E as often, and it's like sort of a more forgiving ability, we think, should hopefully undo some of that pro skew because, well, she's getting played in the world literally right now and is like arguably a mathematically weak solo queue champion. Other change is moving our W damage to bonus AD as well, because W is getting a, so again, I like bonus AD ratios when I can use them. I think they make sense when they make sense. I don't want one of these to be total AD, I want to be bonus AD, so basically moving this one bonus AD as well. But because the AD scaling on the basic W has been increased, I wanted to compensate that on the R so that her like total appetite for longswords hasn't increased. Yunar's in a cool spot where she does, in fact, she's one of the AD carries who buys a Zeal item regularly and likes building attack speed. We want to keep that. We don't want her to go into Lucian, Corki, Ezreal sort of like caster AD carry territory. That is not the goal. I realize we're buffing W, but we're buffing W's base damage and AD ratio in almost lockstep. And so the sort of total impact there is not really a higher appetite for longswords because it's just keeping up with the actual with the base damage itself. Regardless, though, still being cognizant of not making her go towards a caster build, so nerfing AD ratio a little bit here, compensating the base damage pretty well. This will still end up being mathematically a nerf for her live build in most cases, but hey, the lower AD desire might open up one extra slot for an attack speed item or something else going on. One minor thing as well, actually, with this W change, as we keep talking about Yunara for 15 minutes, is that I rebuilt the calculation for the dot damage on W. Instead of being its own bespoke number, it is simply now 60% of the hit damage. And that, I think the way we should tune the dot is just as a percentage of the base hit. I don't think these things should like scale differently and diverge. Let's say, ooh, AP Yunara does like dot damage. I don't think that makes sense. I think AP Yunara presses W is fine. I think that is a very reasonable build. Now, again, we're not anywhere close to AP Yunara being good, don't get me wrong. But one output this does have is technically we are buffing AP Yunara because, there's an AP ratio getting inherited here on the dot, which is actually more increased for the AP than the AD. Doesn't really matter here, don't get me wrong. AP Yunara is not real right now. Not even sure what that build would look like what it would actually output that would be good. But it is technically there for any AP Yunara players out there. On to the next set of champion adjustments. Graves is getting an adjustment. It is very likely power positive, but we don't have this change easily in isolation. Our data doesn't go back far enough to dig this up, even though this was done by itself at one point in time. So E is going back to giving magic resist on the stacks of grit. It is giving 50% to MR as what it gives to armor. So if it gives 4 armor per stack, it gives 2 MR per stack. If it gives 16 armor, it's going to give 8 MR. And this is an incentive to be like, yes, true grit matters, getting your stacks back up, getting attack speed and crit to land more pellets per second to stack your E faster. That is all going to be relevant. And the variance between Graves having no grit and having a lot of grit is going to be higher now because obviously there's more output on grit. Now, because Graves is now a full range champion and gets MR elsewhere, we're going back to him having ranged champion base MR. Now, the result here is going to be that Graves is going to literally be squishier if his grit is not up, or if he's only at 1 stack from casting it, on a monster at one point, at like once. Now, of course, if he can get his grit, keep his grit up, he is tankier. We do want to move Graves toward being a tankier champion, not quite Urgot, not Juggernaut, but have him go for those longer duration fights and not lethality one shot as it is on live. If we have to retune him, we certainly can. We can lower armor and health. We can take down damage we need to, whatever it is. Graves should certainly have weaknesses, of course. He should have strengths as well. And his E should be good. And I don't think... Basically, I just think this is good for the champion. I think this allows us to tune him into the state where he relies on grit and becomes more durable. And that's fine. That's what it's meant to be. And we'll find the tuning that makes sense for this ability. Dr. Mundo is actually one of our, if not the most... this champ is OP survey response champs in the game. What's funny is we know when Alois, I don't know how to pronounce his screen name, was doing the whole big Mundo top lane stuff, the pick and ban rate on Mundo spiked, win rate went nowhere. We waited a long time, the pick and ban rate eventually went back down, and it's yeah, this champ isn't actually OP, but he is still pretty strongly responded to from surveys as an OP champion. So we're doing some adjustments here that's going to be pretty low win rate impact, we think. It will, I think, be win rate down, but only by a few tenths of a percent, but should very meaningfully affect the eye-popping late-game stuff. So we are trading off some late-game gold scaling damage, specifically late-game gold scaling burst damage for late-game generic durability. So we're not really changing the power curve. Mundo being a scaler is a good thing. We actually want to keep that. In general, I would say many of the power curves we have right now are relatively appropriate. I think there's still some that we should tweak intentionally, but Mundo being a scaler is part of the identity, and we do not want to get rid of that. So again, we're trading off late game for late game here. But yeah, we're trading off a lot of the burst damage on the E. 2% bonus health, and keep in mind, this can be 1.4x the number based on how low he gets. This could be, 2.8% bonus health, which could be several thousand, right? So, almost 3% of many thousands is quite a lot of burst damage, actually. Now, sure, he's, of course, feeding into Heartsteel some, he's feeding into Titanic Hydra some, that's all still adding up, of course. But at the end of the day, we think this is going to be minorly win rate negative. We're trading off some damage for durability, which I think he's allowed to totally have. Mundo is very tanky champion and should remain that way. And a bit less bursty, which hopefully is feelable and will make him feel less OP because, yeah, he does have some expectation breaking burst for sure. On the champion buffs, very straightforward, simple stuff here. I know Bard is one of the strongest supports in the game. So I'm not saying this as XD, the game is too balanced. The goal above game balance is make the best, most vibrant game you can. And one way to serve that is to balance the game, right? One of the values of game balance is that you should be able to play the champion you like playing and are not punished for maining something. Now, this can't be held in all cases always. Like, some champions are very easy to play or balanced around lower MMRs or whatever. And it's like at a certain point, it's very hard to be in a Mumu main and challenger. I'm sorry. Whereas relative to like most hard champions like Nidalee or Rengar, they're going to look bad in bronze, but they're actually just too hard for most bronze players. If you're a bronze player and you learn Rengar, you can actually win a good number of games. But it's most of the easy champions who are a little constrained by lower MMR win rates that can't really succeed in challenger. But outside of that, pretty much every champion is tuned to where if you main a champion, you'll win more than half your games. And every champion kind of has room for that. Basically, every champ is in this fate right now. So, okay, we have to make sure that like the champs that you want to play, you don't get punished for doing so. And for the vast majority of players, you can do that. So cool. That's one box checked of game balance, right? The other thing is creating incentives. So for example, I think it's actually valuable that Pyke is, to be fair, actually slightly OP as support right now because he creates such a different experience and actually allows you to not have an autofilled support sometimes because there are players who the only reason they play support is Pyke. And I've done the informal poll before. People are like, would you rather have an autofilled Blitzcrank or a Zyra main? And everyone says, I'd rather have an autofilled Blitzcrank. But like, don't want to tell you. We definitely want to provide that breadth of experience. And it's like, yep, there's going to be some support players who want to play an assassin. There's going to be some support players who want to play a mage. And these champions are going to remain as viable options. Now, not the best options. That's not what we're saying. But these champions who do different things and unique things, being viable is a good thing. It was actually funny, the patch where we buffed up Rek'Sai and added our first attempt at Nautilus Jungle had like a really measurable impact on jungle role pick rate. It was like almost like 1 full percentage point higher. When you consider like, about 20% of players play any given role, it's like 5% more people play jungle. And it was like a very obvious noticeable spike. Like for the last 6 months of data, it's like, here's jungle pick rate. And then a like notable 5% increase in jungle players. And the patch were like, yeah, what happened is like we added more junglers, right? And it was like that was a patch that actually hit for people and they're like, I want to go play this. So like those can like really have an impact here, right? It's like it like measurably has an impact having some champions show up. And I'm not saying it was exactly Nautilus, right? But like that kind of thing can happen here and show stuff up. It actually might have been the Sylas patch. I forget which one Sylas came into. Regardless, Sylas was one of them. It probably was Sylas. Regardless, that kind of measurable impact in like the kinds of roles people play. When Yunara came out, bot lane became the most picked role in the game for a little while in almost all MMR brackets, for example. Like the having these new experiences like truly can matter. And like variety is really valuable. And I'm not going to spend any more time here. We're already 30 minutes in. I'm halfway through the patch. We're back to the old me. So anyway, this is all to say that there are more values here than simply what is numerically exactly balanced. Bard is numerically overpowered. We are retaining Bard as one of the strongest champions in the game. He is one of the better sports you can play. Bard is very unique. Bard does very, very cool things. Bard at this tuning also gets pro play, which is freaking sweet because we've been hoping to get Bard in pro play for a long time, and we finally got it. Speaking of which, we have Kiana in pro play. That's also freaking sweet because she'd been gone since like Clutch Gaming was in the at Worlds. So cool to see that here again as well, right? It's like, yeah, some of that like derives some really good positive experiences because you get to see a lot of things. Like turns out a lot of people watch Worlds, right? So right, these things have real value to the game, and it's like, oh no, this champ is 1% OP. It's like this has real value to the game, and 1% OP is not breaking the game. And Bard's in the state. Bard's about 1% OP, and it's not breaking the game, and it provides some good things. Now that said, Bard only really has one build, and it's basically tank utility. There's some players going Leandries. Everyone in ARAM goes AP, and it's garbage. Bard, I think it'd be cool to see secondary builds out there. And I thought about what he does already as a champion and what's available. I'm like, you know what? I did the changes here for Bard. I think Bard having a stronger Enchanter profile when he builds AP, because honestly, the AP items he's going to buy are going to be Enchanter items like Shurelya's, maybe Ardent Censer, whatever, that kind of stuff. I think he could, with the W charges, he could probably actually use Echoes of Helia reasonably well here as well. Regardless, I think he'd probably be good with Mandate also, right? Because he applies slows. All that to say, yes, buffing AP ratios on Bard. His most common build on live has 9 AP. It has 1 stat shard. So this is, he heals for 1 more, and he gives like 0.01% move speed more than before. This is like not going to be feelable. I think it's 0.1% move speed, I guess. Like that's not going to matter to live Bard, and it means that, the real impact, we're going to see more Leandry's Bard, but it is going to nudge us toward him having this alt AP build, which like isn't very strong right now, and we can have that be a possibility for him. Otherwise, we have some pretty simple buffs here. Ezreal, mathematically fairly weak. We think we have some room for him. 0.5 AD growth feeds into his Q, feeds into his Sheen for Trinity Force as well, feeds into his auto attacks. Pretty simple stuff here. Nothing very spicy. It's just here's some damage for Ezreal without him being, a completely overbearing lane bully, which I think is a very reasonable tactic to take. Callista is a very simple one as well. There are other changes on PvE. What we're going for here is 0.5 AD growth. The goal, weirdly somewhat different from Ezreal, despite being the exact same change. The goal is to continue to try to give Callista a better mid-game identity. This was part of why I gave her a bunch of AP ratio on the E, because it was going to make her Rageblade spike better, right? She goes Bork, then she builds an Amp Tome, then she builds Rageblade, and like, well, it's going to be at 1.5 and then 2 items. It's not a very big deal. We could actually go harder, probably. It's not like AP Callista is good, so we could further bump that spike by moving those ratios a bit higher down the line. Maybe at some point, whatever. Add it to Q, who knows? Regardless, because Callista's spells have total AD ratios, this is one where it actually makes sense to keep them, because we actually want those to grow with time, and so Callista is an interesting exception. Again, not every champion needs to go bonus AD. Callista's one was like, actually, this will have an impact in her middle levels when like the bonus AD starts really stacking up, or sorry, her total AD growth starts stacking up. And it's like, yeah, once we're late game, the difference between like level 15 and 18, like you don't really level up, very fast anymore. So yes, it's sort of late game skewed here, but we think it's going to have a meaningful impact in the mid game when it's really buoying her ability damage here in the middle. Yone plus 2 AD, pretty simple. We do think he has room for buffs. We know he's going to be one of the champions affected by Doran Shield's second win and whatnot, but he's also going to really kind of enjoy getting more lifesteal on his W and Q and R damage and whatnot, or Omni damage, I should say. So I think this should have some moderate value overall. Not much to say except that we're buffing Yone by a small amount here, giving some more agency in the early lane. And of course, we'll measure how every melee champion does post-patch and retune as needed. Finally, we have champion nerfs here. Diana, we simply overshot. We had historic data on the monster passive. Despite that, it seems like things changed a little bit in the middle here, and we overshot what our goals were, and so we're basically taking the midpoint between where we are now and where we were, buffing Diana's jungle clear and giving her the win rate we think she deserves. Kog'Maw is getting a pretty simple change of minus 5% bonus attack speed on the Q passive. This is usually in impact level 2 and onward, sometimes level 3, about a quarter players that way. This should probably be about 1% win rate on its own. Basically, Kog'Maw is a close to 54% win rate bot laner. Usually we let him sit around 52-53, and that is what allows him, like, yes, he's actually technically an elo printer. He wins a lot of games, but he's also, like, even at his current state of being one of the strongest things you could possibly in bot lane, he's, like, bottom 4 of conventional auto attackers in bot lane in terms of pick rate. He's, like, above Neela and Callista, and that's about it. I think there's one more, but whereas, again, like, he's not very popular, and so it's, like, again, one of the values of like live design and balance is like, hey, game to game variety is valuable. Having Kog'Maw in there once in a while, but not dominating the meta by the best champ you could play because he's in every game, valuable, right? Like the old AP Kog'Maw who just simply wave cleared, that was like a bad gameplay experience. We nerfed that out. We nerfed the wave clear version of AP Kog'Maw and then brought back AP Kog'Min as something you can play and lose in game 4. But it's there and that's cool. Was it game 5? Whatever, who cares? But the point is, like, hey, cool, we got to see AP Kog'Maw. Wasn't that pretty sweet? That's pretty cool, right? Like, variety, awesome, fun stuff there. But yeah, again, overtuned right now. Don't want to make him as dominant, but yeah, he'll have a high win rate, and he'll be in, some of the games, and that's going to be fine overall. Morgana definitely exists now as a mid laner here. The W tweaks have certainly served to give her a mid lane player base here, which is cool. What's interesting is it's, like, the pick rate is like completely lockstep across all MMRs, which I find kind of fascinating. But every MMR is like just up into the right, playing more Morgana mid right now. Armor growth, I believe pretty strongly, is going to be a mid-skewed lever. By the time, armor growth matters, you're no longer stuck in bot lane as support Morgana. Mid Morgana obviously gains more levels here overall. Of course, I could be wrong. Morgana's actually really popular, and so we'll have really high-quality data to measure by the time it's time for point 22. If we have to change tactics, we will if we have to. Hopefully, we don't have to. But yeah, cool. Morgana is factually too strong in mid lane. Players have noticed. Great. About 1% win rate off of armor growth. Hopefully, is mid lane skewed and puts her in a more reasonable win rate, and we'll see what happens. Yes, she has very, very good wave clear. That's the W we made, right? That's the spell she has. She's going to have good wave clear, but she'll have more, she'll be more susceptible to being attacked. If you can get pushed against her, the minions get past the, tormented soil. It's not called that anymore. Who cares? And so, there will be counterplay, right? You know, watching the mid lane with wave clear is not unheard of. There's plenty of champs who do it. So yeah, I'm not terribly concerned that Morgana has good wave clear. It's you know, not the only champ who does this, so I think it's okay. Kiana, in a spot where, I'm still glad we did the changes we did, where we, you know, really surged up her player base, got people to play Kiana jungle. I mean, back before, you can like go find the old video if you really want, but it's like, before we did anything, it's like Kiana jungle was already quite good, and it was as good as Kiana mid, and the champ was like balanced-ish and like very playable, and like no one really played her, no one really cared, so like, yeah, we buffed, and it was like, hey, remember Kiana? She's actually a good champion. And then like we finally got all the jungle players. Like even right now, she's like 2-1 played in jungle and has like a very real mid lane pick rate as well. And it's like, okay, well, she's mathematically overpowered. It's cool that she's in pro. That's pretty sweet. But like, yeah, the champ's overtuned. Let's bring this down and make this champion balanced, right? And so there's another swing at that one. Not trying to skew too hard one or the other. I don't think it's a problem that Kiana has more plays in jungle than mid. I think it's totally fine for this asset to be there. It kind of makes sense. And so finding changes that are like relatively equal across the two. HP growth going to be a little bit mid lane skewed, not a very big deal. And AD ratio on Q going to usually be a little bit jungle skewed because it's a large portion of her clear speed and whatnot into, you know, the mid game, whatever. So regardless, it's going to be, you know, -1% to Kiana. We'll see what happens in terms of how players perceive the champion, if she's still perceived OP, but yeah, minor, you know, nerfs here. Quinn is our one preemptive nerf for top lane because of Doran Shield second win stuff. Also, decent chance of gaining from the change to Omnivamp on Doran's Blade here as well. Simply nerfing the bonus AD ratio on Q by 0 to 20%, not 0 to 10%. It's going from 0.8 to 1.2 to 0.8 to 1. So it's going to affect her sort of like later on laning phase. She maxes it second in almost all cases, so level 8 onwards you'll feel this, but you know, early game lane bullying not really affected here. Are in somewhat of a similar boat here, where it's being changed pretty strongly actually from 70% total AD with no scaling at all to a base value of 60, 90, 120 with a 30% bonus AD ratio. So the point here actually is to try to woo Quinn off of the high lethality builds. Obviously the big buffs to my brain saying presence of mind, Profane Hydra, push Quinn back onto Profane here, and it's like, well, you are actually an AD carry, you do actually have crit synergy here. Obviously, Collector's a really good bridge between those two builds, I get that, but it would be nice to allow you to play attack speed and crit builds more again, so let's move back that way. And so a lot of this is, yeah, even though Quinn as an early game lane bully is not really getting affected very strongly here, right? Q is not nerfed until level 8. The ultimate is not nerfed very strongly at level 6 either. It is moving the build off of lethality one-shot and hopefully toward crit, attack speed, you know, hybrid or, you know, more hybridized builds like that, and, you know, maybe static shift coming back as well. And yeah, Quinn's gonna be a strong lane bully. I don't think you can make this kit and be like, no, actually, she's a late game scaler who, by being ranged and having vault, is basically unattackable in lane, but she's not a bully, she'll just outscale you. And it's like, what's your counterplay when you're Darius? Flash E and hope you one-shot? And it's like, if I don't have flash, I lose forever? That sounds terrible. So I think Quinn being a bully mechanically is, I think, correct. Now, again, the degree to which she is a lane bully can be debated, of course, but I think like a soft downward curve is probably appropriate for a champion like this. And so it's like, you know, right now the curve is not really that. And so generally late game skewed nerfs, especially towards, again, nerfing the value of bonus AD, having her go for other things instead, to me is a valuable shape here and worth pursuing. So that is the patch. Managed to clock in about 45 minutes. Thanks for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.